Don't you dare.
His demand was far too light-hearted for you to pay any attention to. You pulled yourself up to your feet, brandishing the cake. Axel's laughter tugged a grin onto his lips.
No.
The no was far sterner than his initial warning, like he was ready to scold you if you followed through on your plan. It caught you off guard. The question of what he might do flitted through your mind. From his expression, you knew it would be harmless, but there was definitely a hint that he would retaliate. You wanted to know what he planned to do. You liked the tone of his voice when he gave you a warning. You threw the cake. You only noticed that the dark armour around your heart had slipped off once the dessert had made a direct hit on Axel's shoulder. He grinned, but you scrambled to fix your defences back in place, aware just how vulnerable you had left yourself for a moment. Axel flicked the cake off, one eyebrow raised in amusement. He made eye contact with you.
Come here.
He gave you the command, only you were done playing. You felt the light inside you fighting to break out, but you couldn't let it. The more you suppressed it, the more you felt the darkness shielding it, cracking in an irreparable way. You wanted to go to him. You wanted to play. You wanted to trust. Holding in your feelings like this hurt your chest, but you were still too scared to get hurt. If you let the weak light of your heart have its way, only for it to be damaged, you were certain you wouldn't be able to save yourself a second time. "Stop it," you said, colder than you had intended. It clearly took Axel aback, but he didn't let it sit on his features for too long. Still, you felt guilty. It wasn't his fault. It was your insecurities getting the better of you. Again. "Sorry, Axel. No, it's just..." You weren't sure if you had planned an ending to that sentence, but it became obsolete. At that moment, you spotted something behind Axel, floating in the river. "Oh!" You dashed forwards, panic in your eyes. There was a small, chubby donkey tipped on its back, stuck in the water as it floated downstream. If tipping a donkey was someone's idea of a joke, what a terrible joke it was to play. You dashed past Axel, shedding your cardigan as you went, then your shoes. Only Axel's stern voice halted you in your tracks.
Stay there.
You wobbled to stop yourself. Unlike last time, Axel's tone was serious. If he meant it, it would have been far easier for him to grab you when you had shot past him, but he knew you didn't like being grabbed out of nowhere. You wondered if he had purposefully kept his hands to himself. Still, he had rooted you all the same. You looked back at him, expecting him to be mad from your outburst, but as soon as your eyes met, you saw he only had your best interests at heart.
I'll get it,
Axel assured you, striding forwards as he unzipped his cloak. Your heartbeat sped up exponentially. You very rarely saw him take it off, and never made a point to stare at him when he was half naked in the hot tub. He shrugged the cloak off, revealing lean muscles under a tight black vest top, before he dropped the weighted cloak over your head as he walked past. You were glad. You were blushing terribly, even more so now that you could smell the earthy, botanical scents of his clothes.
Don't want you getting your clothes wet and catching a cold.
Axel waded into the stream up to his calves, aware how hypocritical he was being. He didn't want you getting sick while he was away, that was all. He didn't like the idea of you being isolated, ill, lonely, and unable to cook. You pulled Axel's cloak away from your face. He saw how red you were, and couldn't help but think that you looked just a little bit cute. "But you'll catch a cold instead," you demanded. He appreciated the concern, but he had nothing to worry about. His fire magic would dry him off in no time.
Please,
he scoffed, approaching the sad-looking upturned donkey.
Who do you think you're talking to?
You could only tut, hearing the confidence in his voice. Only Axel could think he was special enough to be immune to the common cold. The stream tugged at Axel's legs the deeper he waded, though it was nothing strong enough to bowl him over. When he was next to the donkey, a tired grey thing with little to no interest in righting itself, like it had given up entirely, he noticed that it wasn't a donkey at all. It was alive, there was no doubt about it, but it was a stuffed toy, a huge, stumpy donkey plushie. Axel was so surprised that he let the thing drift by him, carrying on its way downstream. It was only you calling out to him, asking what he was doing, that put him back on track. Axel waded after the toy, then grabbed it by the back legs to halt it. Its tail swished in the water. Axel called your name, sounding amazed. You weren't going to believe this. Only, he never had chance to tell you about the toy, because the toy decided to speak, making Axel jolt in surprise.
Actually,
the creature said in a deep, slow voice.
My name's Eeyore, but I suppose I should be happy to be called any name at all. People often forget about little old Eeyore.
What?
Axel couldn't find the words. He pulled the toy over to the edge of the stream, hardly able to believe it could talk. He had been to many worlds and seen many things, but huge talking toys were not things he saw often. Once he was at the shoreline, you came hurrying over, asking if the creature was all right. Before Axel could talk, the donkey spoke. Unlike Axel, you found the toy's ability to speak delightful.
Nobody's asked me how I am in such a long time. If I'm honest, I'm a little bit sad, but I'm always a little bit sad. But other than sad, I should say that now that I'm being rescued, I'm a little bit better than I was before.
What's your name? You asked, hoping to listen to the droll donkey longer. He had such a charming voice and way of speaking for such a melancholy creature.
Eeyore,
the donkey said as Axel tried to pull him onto the shore. Unfortunately, his plush body was extremely heavy from soaking up water. Axel had to wrap his arms around the donkey's middle and tug as hard as he could. You might have offered to help, but from where you were standing, it looked like Axel was hugging the gloomy toy. You didn't dare interrupt the adorable scene. It was all you could do to try and commit it to memory.
Thanks for the help!
Axel wheezed. Then with one final heave, he managed to pull Eeyore onto the grass, then rolled him to get him onto his feet. The donkey wobbled and dripped, but he said thank you and shook himself once he was upright. As Axel collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, you crouched down beside the donkey and stroked him down his wet mane in comfort. How did you end up in the stream? Did you fall in? Slowly, Eeyore shook his head.
I was pushed.
Pushed?
Pushed,
he agreed.
I was minding my own business, drinking from the stream by my house, when all of a sudden, someone bounced up behind me and pushed me in.
That's terrible. You couldn't believe someone would do this to such a cute little guy. The donkey swished his tail, looking gloomy as ever.
No bother. It's not the first time. Won't be the last.
His fatalism rubbed you up the wrong way. He didn't have to stand for bullying, but it felt like he had given up. You opened your mouth, ready to give him a great and valiant speech about standing up for what's right. Only Axel intervened, raising a lazy arm into the air. He was sprawled on his back in the grass, gazing at you.
How long were you in the stream? You must be a fair way from home.
His question took the wind from your speech, replacing it with the urge to help Eeyore get home. The donkey regarded Axel, tilting his head to shake the water from his ears.
Oh, a while. But if I follow the stream, I'll get home eventually.
Can we come with you? You asked before Axel could say anything. You wanted to make sure he got home without anyone pushing him in the water again. The donkey nodded, turning to head back down the stream, plodding along at a slow, soggy pace.
I should like that,
he said.
Company might be nice. I don't have company often.
Your heart went out to Eeyore. He was just so gloomy. Do you live by yourself? You set off after Eeyore, hoping to give him as much company as physically possible. Axel watched you go. He rolled his eyes, chuckling at you. You were such a softie. He picked himself up, realizing the picnic was over, collected everything up in the hamper, used a blanket to dry off his trousers as best he could, then threw his coat back on. You hadn't made it very far when he caught up. Eeyore walked at a slow pace, and you were matching him by taking long, leisurely strides. Not that Axel didn't love a talking, walking, clearly clinically depressed stuffed donkey, but he couldn't help but think about the time. The sun had passed its peak long ago. He checked his watch to be sure. He had to leave tonight. He still hadn't breached the subject to you, and he really wanted to spend as much time as possible with you before he left. He wasn't sure, but having you distracted by Eeyore was making him feel frustrated? He had hoped today would be just the two of you, experiencing a new world together. But at the pace you were walking, with no donkey home in sight, it might be a while before he had your full attention again. It was odd. You were in the fresh air, you were walking, just like he had planned for today, yet he wasn't satisfied that you were paying more attention to a stuffed toy than him. He was fairly certain he was feeling jealous, but he hadn't felt much of anything in such a long time that he couldn't be sure. Then again, the sparks of light inside you were showing through. They had been out in full force earlier, but for some reason you had shut your heart off midway through the food fight. You often did that. You would let your guard relax, enjoying yourself. Then all of a sudden you would tense up. It was difficult for Axel. He always thought he was close to a breakthrough with you, feeling like you finally trusted him enough to show him your true self. It had only been a few months though. He was hoping for a miracle in thinking he could reverse your trust issues in such a limited amount of time. He had definitely made progress, but it was going to take more time. The one thing that was certain though, that stopped him from giving up, was the feeling in his chest. It was having feelings, period. There was no denying it now. He was beginning to grow a heart. You spoke with Eeyore, asking him all about his life in the woods. You loved listening to him, even though he sounded perpetually gloomy. Have you always lived here? You asked, gazing along the river to check for Eeyore's home. The donkey nodded, flicking more water from his mane. As you walked, the water slowly but steadily drained out the bottoms of his paws and his belly. He felt considerably lighter now, but he walked just as sluggishly.
I have. It's a quiet place, but it's home. It would be nice to have visitors more often, but I suppose everyone has busy lives. No one has time to spend on me.
The worst part was that he didn't sound annoyed by the fact, only gloomy, like it was a given that he had to be lonely, that he couldn't change his fate. You listened a while longer, trekking into the woodiest part of the forest as the stream carried on, feeling sadder and sadder for the lonely little donkey. You wanted to demand that Axel let you move here so you could live next to Eeyore permanently, but you knew he wouldn't let you. You often made choices from the heart, much to your own annoyance, but at least Axel had the sense to steer you rationally. All of a sudden, while listening to Eeyore talk, you heard a sound. It was someone shouting. Axel stepped ahead, holding his arm out. You were under the impression the Acre Wood was a peaceful place, but it seemed he didn't want to take any chances.
Hang on.
He waited to hear the noise again. You stopped, but the donkey plodded on. Clearly, there was no real danger in this world. You doubted Eeyore knew how to be scared. "Eeyore!" you whispered loudly, trying to call him back. He looked over his shoulder, but carried on. Then you heard the sound again. You realized, finally, that someone was calling Eeyore's name. Axel noticed it too.
I think
Axel said with a grin.
Eeyore isn't as alone as he thinks he is.
You wondered what Axel meant, walking forwards in hope of catching up to the toy. Only Axel caught you by the hand and tugged you back. You yelped in surprise at his sudden action, but Axel put his finger to his lips, his eyes once more alive with amusement.
Come on.
He tugged you off to the side to hide amongst the trees. You could still see Eeyore from where you perched, and you wondered why Axel wouldn't let you return to him. Then, after hearing someone calling for the donkey again, you finally saw something small running along the forest floor. It was pink and green, and looked very anxious.
Eeyore, where are you?
Oh, Piglet, I do hope Eeyore is okay. I should hate for something to have happened to him.
Behind the pink and green thing, a much larger, and far easier to recognise for what it was, yellow teddy bear, appeared from amongst the trees, following the stream with his nose pointed towards the ground.
See?
Axel pointed as the two newcomers finally spotted Eeyore ambling his way towards them. At once, the two small creatures leapt up in excitement, then dashed towards the donkey. Your heart felt warm, watching the two embrace the tired, plodding Eeyore. You were glad. You were happy he had friends who worried for him. You were happy he had people who cared, even though he thought he didn't. You knew all too well what it felt like to feel alone. You were only happy he was wrong, and that he wasn't alone at all.
Come on.
Axel tugged you away. You couldn't understand why he wanted to leave right now. You wanted to meet Eeyore's friends. You were reveling in the knowledge that the donkey really did have those who cared about him. "Can't we stay and say hello?" To his credit, Axel did stop to debate it, but in the end he shook his head.
Better the fewer people know we're here.
Why? You didn't think there was much harm in it. Is it to do with the organisation?
Kinda.
Axel admitted.
But there's certain people who come here who can't know we've been.
It was too confusing. There was someone worse than the organisation, yet they visited an adorable, peaceful world like this. Who? You wondered.
Call him the organization's arch nemesis. Prime target? I don't know.
Axel seemed at a loss of how to describe him.
He likes to get in the way of plans.
It still made very little sense to you, but you realised if word got back to this arch nemesis that Axel had been here, it might get tough for Axel. You agreed to leave, stealing one last glance at Eeyore and his companions, with your heart aglow with happiness.